The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
All right, it's episode number 78, and it is 165 days till the man burns as of this recording. Okay. I've got a bunch of stuff to fill you in on before we get into today's interview with our guest, the buzzing, buzzworthy, lots of buzz, Mr. Randy Polumbo. I know that's what a lot of you have probably tuned in for, and we are going to get to Randy in just a few minutes, but first I have to tell you about where we actually went to record today's show. Because having an understanding of the actual location is crucial to understanding the event. And the event is kind of the centerpiece of today's interview. This has been one of those weekends that have left me still needing some time to process. So I'm kind of bringing you along with me as well. So producer Rebel has been out in a spectacular rusted metal visual orgy desert environment with a hammer and buzzsaw working on some massive art builds. For most of us, this is kind of a crazy big deal, but for producer Rebel, it's just Tuesday. And where he was is the Salton Sea. And the event that he was out there for, and our team had the pleasure of attending, was the Bombay Beach Biennale. Biennale. You know, I've heard it pronounced a few different ways. So anyway, when you Google the event, humorously enough, Bombay Beach Biennale, one of the top links that pops up is from the New York Times, describing it as the, I'm doing quotes here, anti-Burning Man. So keeping that particular descriptive in mind should make you chuckle a few times as you listen to the forthcoming conversation. How does one go about describing the Bombay Beach Biennale? But it's kind of a tongue twister. It's like an acid-fueled fever dream as seen through a film photo filter, populated by an inexplicably seamless mixture of artists and musicians and ballet dancers and LA scenesters and Instagram models casually walking the streets alongside desert locals and RV travelers and patch-wearing bikers. There's a video over at bombaybeachbiennale.org which gives you a snapshot. So it's Bombay Beach is spelled kind of how it sounds. Biennale is Biennale. One of the buzziest art pieces at the event, of course, was Angler Grove by Randy Polumbo. And when the opportunity presented itself to book an interview with Randy, Rebel just couldn't let that pass. And I found myself also out in a spectacular rusted metal visual orgy desert environment, along with the rest of the podcast crew, but, you know, holding a microphone instead. If you Google the Salton Sea, you'll understand why it's kind of a photographer's wet dream. The textures, the colors, the dilapidated structures, and just some real quick background information on the area. In the early 1900s, the Salton Sea was a dry lake bed, much like the Playa. They were transporting water from the Colorado River to the Imperial Valley for agriculture, and they built these canals for that purpose. And there was a buildup of silt in the canals. Silt is, I'm reading the definition here, a fine sand, clay, or other material carried by running water. Anyway, there's this buildup, and the canals burst, and the lake bed starts to fill up like an empty cereal bowl being filled with milk. And they couldn't contain the burst for like 2 freaking years. And that's how the Salton Sea dry lake bed became like an actual sea. It is the largest lake in California. So after it becomes an actual lake, people are like, hey, this is kind of cool. Let's fill it up with fish and build resorts next to it. Because that seems like a great idea. In the 1950s, the Salton Sea had become a destination for Hollywood elites, where people were sunbathing at resorts on the beach, but they kind of created a monster due to the high salt concentration and the constant evaporation of the water. They had to keep filling it up with fresh water because, well, there was a reason it had become a dry lake bed, I guess. I'm not a scientist, but that's sort of what I'm connecting as I got the background information. Then we throw in all the runoff from agricultural chemicals and pesticides, so the fish die, and what you end up with is toxic dust filling the oxygen we breathe as the water evaporates and transports the chemicals and the smell of rotting dead fish through the entire region. And so the fresh water has stopped being added since like 2014 when the water rights changed ownership. A tiny number of people still live there, though. Elected officials are aware, they're paying attention, they've written ballot measures to address the toxic air pollution. And so the proceeds from the event, the Bombay Beach Biennale, are going towards helping the area, the residents, and their little economy and the environment. So let's get back to Randy Polumbo. On Sunday, Randy and I recorded the conversation that you're about to hear, and we start by chatting about the event and the area itself and the role that art and artists play in addressing our communities and the environment. So all of this background information, this is all to give you context on this stuff that we're going to be talking about in just a minute. Randy has had multiple pieces at Burning Man. His most recent was Angel Queen from this last year's burn. How do I describe it? It's like a little spaceship thing that you could climb inside of. So there's a lot of people hanging out inside of it. Type his name into Google and just get lost down the rabbit hole for the next 2 hours. There's a ton of coverage about his various installations on and off Playa, local and international. We pontificate for a while on art and art theory. We'll discuss his earlier life, his understanding of masculinity through experiences with his father, and life in Joshua Tree and the New York City art scene, and of course, ending up at Burning Man. So today's show is, it's going to be Randy and I talking about this like super crazy event, which is got tons of buzz happening around the world, and with this very buzzworthy, buzzing artist himself, Randy, and this super interesting environment, the Salton Sea. There's a lot of interesting stuff packed into today's show. And after the interview, do stick around for the closing set by Orient Kaiser, which was recorded at this Orient's annual country club party up in upstate New York. That's coming up after this crazy conversation. So anyway, let's get into it. Today's episode is entitled Polumbo and the Biennale. Polumbo and the Biennale. It's such whimsical. So art. Anyway, I go by Mr. Arash, even though nobody calls me Mr. Welcome to Burner Podcast.
I was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was the fly with the bugs and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. Good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, because there ain't no one
No.
Oh, I thought he was getting a splitter or something.
Maybe.
Yeah, we can close it. I think
Just turn it smack back and forth. Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, it's so I just like so for the listeners can understand where we are right now. We're sitting inside of your trailer that is been lifted up on top of a shipping container.
Indeed.
And then we had to crawl up a bunch of haystacks to get in here.
Yes, you can thank Rebel for that.
Yeah.
I came up with the haystack idea, but he came up with the Mr. Toad's Impossible Ride.
Yeah.
There's a couple of steps missing and a couple of precipitous falls, but it's very exciting once you get up here, and even more exciting when you want to come down again.
Yeah. It's got a really nice view, and up here is definitely the best weather.
I think this really makes it the beach house because you can see the water from here now.
Absolutely.
So before it was kind of the desert trailer, which is not that unique, but
how many times have you been out here to Bombay Beach?
Oh gosh, I was in this event last year, so just for that alone, I probably came out 10 times because I was going back to Joshua Tree to sleep because I didn't realize I hadn't cracked the code on sleepovers here yet, except I slept in my car one night. And before that, I was down a few times, so I'm probably up to almost 20 now.
Yeah. That's definitely way more than most people that I've met this weekend.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it's an annual pilgrimage. The organizers are actually down here a bunch. There's a whole bunch of people in the Bombay Beach Biennale community who are down at the ski-in or hanging out at their place and are part of the community. And
yeah, it's one of the things that we were looking at before. So we're at the Bombay Beach Biennale. Is that how it's pronounced? Biennale?
Biennale.
Biennale?
Yeah.
Biennale? Okay. Which I think kind of means biannual.
I mean, it's a brilliant and a preposterous, a little bit existentialist event. So I think the first one was 0.
Yeah.
The second one was 1. And yeah, it should be every 2 years, but it seems to be every year. But then everyone never knows. I would assume the next one will be next year, but the orders will come and we'll heed the call, I guess.
It's a fascinating event. I've been trying to kind of make mental notes on how I can explain to the listeners what it is, and it's difficult. It's difficult to quite like categorize it. It's very feels cliche to say avant-garde, but it is very much like an avant-garde event. There's a lot of inexplicable art, and it definitely feels like it's the kind of place where the artists have been given kind of free rein to go a little nuts. So I'm hoping that what we can do is we can kind of go through and kind of introduce the listeners to the event a little bit based on your experience. And then we want to get more into like your own history and your own development as an artist in your career and how it all just kind of intersects at this place. So can you how would you describe this event to your friends?
Wow.
Good.
Well, it's somewhere kind of a delicious middle ground between a maybe avant-garde folly and a kind of academic symposium. So it's interesting. There's people, I think more so last year, but there's, major cultural thinker type of people. And then there's kind of the most instinctual, visual, and kind of three-dimensional artists working maybe for reasons that they don't know, and then everything in between. And it's one of the things that's most interesting to me is that it's so interdisciplinary. So you might see a world-class ballerina, doing something, remarkable on some old sheets of plywood in front of an old house that has the face torn off and some doors nailed on. Or you might see someone actually creating something that's kind of gruesome and painful and grotesque that's emerging from the squalor, while you stand there. Mm-hmm. Or there's some things with more, higher production values, movies, more kind of curated, stylized things and everything in between. And then I guess I don't want to presume that it's my job to say what it's all about, because no one who's doing it is saying what it's all about. And I think that's part of the fun of it. It has a very open reading, and, once you get here, you can make what you like of it, which to me, that's my very favorite way to approach an artwork, is to have kind of a clean slate, and the viewer approaches and they bring their baggage, their perception, their history. And, they take a role at it, and make their own story, which I think really powerful art, that's how it should work. If you need the big wall label or the intro, that maybe it should go back to the drawing board a little bit. But I think the thing that bonds it all together is a love for this weird little corner of humanity in Southern California that has a combination of things that I think make it particularly enchanting for a certain kind of person. There's something about it that's grotesque and full of despair and, vigorously ugly. There's a lot of caved in, broken, bad smelling things. The body of water itself is fouled and wrecked, but if on a good day, if you stand back, it feels like you're next to some exotic ocean somewhere else, maybe. And then there's moments like almost every minute that you're here, the light is changing. It's so magical, like more so than, I haven't been all over the desert, but I spent a lot of time in the Joshua Tree area and areas around here.
Yeah.
And there's just something incredibly special about how the air, rolls over all the mountains surrounding here and over the water, and it's always doing something crazy. There's clouds that kind of pop up that look like they're, maybe containing secret messages or pictograms, and the next minute there's a black one and a little patch of rain comes out, and then it's sunny again, and then suddenly it looks like the sky is made of steel, and it's just I've been to places that are much more capital B beautiful, but this is a place where I'll just be like digging a hole or taking out the trash or fixing something broken, and I'll look at the sky, and then 5 minutes will go by and I realize I'm just standing there slack-jawed looking at stuff, like the way that I think a lot of children today do that with the computer or the internet or something, and it's so exciting to have the connection with nature, and I think there's something magical about it. And then there's obviously an existing community of people that in a way that's maybe not immediately apparent if you're visiting, are pretty well integrated in the event. A lot of the stuff that's going on here is built by people that live here, helping out artists. There's people that live here who contributed pieces or projects. And
do you know about what the population is? It's super tiny.
Someone told me 200.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that means that they have a trailer that their grandfather had, and they come down a few times when it's very cold wherever they normally live. I think you can kind of go to the ski in or drive around and get an idea for how many cars it look like they run. I think it's a little smaller than that a lot of the time, because people come and go. They have orbits.
Yeah.
That's another interesting thing. There's a lot of folks that go, like, I don't know if it's so much having to do with Bombay Beach, but there's a lot of people that go from places like Canada, and they drive all the way down, and they hang out in Mexico, and they stay in Slab City for a couple of months, and they come here and hang out. And there's something interesting about it.
Yeah, that's quite the understatement. There's something interesting about it. It's fascinating because it's a canvas for sure. It's not a pristine white canvas.
Yeah.
It's already distorted. It's already pulled and stretched and wrecked and dipped in oil.
Right.
And it's fascinating to watch, like, the kinds of artists that are attracted to working on this kind of canvas.
Right. I think the ultimate artist for this kind of situation would be my friend and neighbor in Joshua Tree, Kim Stringfellow, who made this beautiful small book. I think it's Greetings from Bombay Beach, and it has this famous green trailer sinking into a rusty orange puddle that I actually have a print of it at home. It's such a haunting photograph, and now it's a pile of rust that no one remembers where it was. But she does artwork that specifically has to do with things like land use and the way that humans interact with geography and different geological or even social forces and how it affects land and real estate. And I think she got Tao Ruspoli, read her book and came down here, and then a friend of mine, I guess it's all different stories depending which person you ask, but a bunch of people got kind of fixated on Bombay Beach and started hanging out down here, and then that's, I guess, what gave birth to, well, let's do this, let's do that, let's invite some more people and do it. But with the idea of making permanent change and doing things that were actually interesting to a lot of people. I mean, there's some pretty, because there's artists here, there's obtuse things that no one understands, but maybe the artist that made them and a couple of their fans, but there's a lot of, I think everyone in the town gets that, well, why is it interesting that a pile of trash is now a weird homemade opera house that
Yeah.
if they want to, they could go hang out in or use for something. If they say, hey, I want to do a play here, somebody's going to throw them a key. Or if they want to go look at the Hermitage Museum, somebody has a key behind the bar at the Ski Inn, and a couple of people in town have one, and they'll show you. If you say, hey, I want to go in there,
Yeah.
somebody will bike over with a key and let you in, it's amazing. There's like secret museums and, palaces in Europe that maybe operate in the same situation, but I think it's awesome that there's a little homemade version of it here.
Yeah.
In a place where maybe there's not going to be a Bombay Museum of Fine Art or maybe I guess we have our particle physics institute now. But I think it's super cool the way that things are allowed to decay and then they fall into this kind of archaeological record almost. It is kind of like a timeline of different things. You can look around and see different trailer designs from the 1950s that didn't pan out and what they nailed on them to make them not fall over. You can see, houses where the back fell off and someone lived there until the last moment and maybe they walked away with all their furniture still in it and it's all turned kind of the same color of gray. I think it would be hard for a team to make a more interesting movie set for like an apocalyptic movie, and then there's a little house next door with a perfect garden and a compact car and somebody who's there all the time and that's their home. And I love how it all kind of meshes together too. It reminds me of Joshua Tree, where I spend a lot of time, and it's another kind of melting pot where bikers and Nazi skinheads and Marines and hippies and hipsters from LA and artists and locals, born-again Christians, somehow they mostly all manage to play nice together, which is so amazing given what's going on in the world and especially in this country. And I think here, because of the very close quarters and the harsh terrain, like when I was doing the templates for my foam for this project, I said, oh dear, we forgot the chalk. Somebody made a phone call, somebody biked over with chalk.
Yeah.
Where can you, in New York City, you can't do that. You go to the store, or maybe if you wanted to go to somebody's place to get chalk, it would be like a 3-hour project. You can almost make chalk, but everything just kind of happens here in this way that because there's a flow that's unique to it.
Yeah, there's something about this sense of community that comes from us humans banding together in a harsh environment. Because like for a lot of us, this example that you were just giving right now with like somebody being able to come over with some chalk. A lot of people don't get that experience until they go to Burning Man. That's like the first time they get that experience. Oh, wait, you can talk to your neighbors? Oh, here. And I remember even my first burn, like our neighbors came and offered us like some gloves to use while we were building. And my first instinct was to say, no, thanks. Because your brain jumps towards, what does this person want? Like, is there a trade-off? Is they going to sell me something? Are they going to come back and ask for something later? And it's not. It's a chicken or the egg thing that I constantly wonder about, like how much of that came from the desert culture prior to Burning Man and how much of that did this general extended outward culture, continue to feed the world this kind of more this energy, if you will, of community, us against nature, us banding together and building in this thing, I wanted to ask, by the way, Kim Stringfellow, does she teach at San Diego State?
Something like that. I think that sounds right.
I think I've had her.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. I think I had her. I was an art major at San Diego State, mostly so I could tell girls I was an art major. I don't think I got much out of it.
I think you would remember. She's quite striking, tall, super intelligent, and she also has a nice, kind of a modest way of explaining things that are brilliant and a great sense of humor.
Yeah. I remember, because I want to say that was the first time I was introduced to the Salton Sea. Which I still have, I've had a difficult time explaining to this. It is such a bizarre environment. It's difficult to put into words.
Yeah. It seems like it has kind of an ungraspable, almost ineffable quality, the body of water part. Like if you start Googling, I was trying to we're always having these discussions about it because part of the mission of the Biennale also is to attract attention and hopefully to help the many ongoing missions to somehow save it or stabilize it as well. And if you look around, it seems like even the scientific data doesn't really agree. So there's places where, there's 6 times the level of salt that there is in the Dead Sea, or there's 16 times, or 75% of the migratory birds that pass over stop, and this percentage are poisoned, and then somewhere else it says 50%. And all like different smart professionals are all coming up with different numbers that don't even make sense. I think there's something about it that's maybe a little bit ungraspable, and it's such a difficult problem to solve. And everyone has their pet solution that always have to get more water from the Colorado River or dig something up from Mexico. There's some canal that kind of heads this way that could be extended, but really there's not any answers that aren't so heinously expensive unless maybe the whole Defense Department was closed and put into the Salton Sea. It seems unlikely, which I don't know. It's sad because it does serve a purpose now, even though it was an accident. There's a lot of birds that rely on it, for example.
Right.
Not to mention, and it's funny, I've noticed there's hardly any dead fish in the beach now. I don't know if that means that all the artists scavenged them and shingled their house with them, or I was just getting ready to launch one on a drone so it could fly around town. But yeah, it is changing and rapidly. Like last year, you could walk up to the water. My piece was almost in the water, and now it seems like it's another several hundred yards away.
Yeah.
And then the dust that comes off of it is so nasty, you almost don't want to go near it, or even in the town. A lot of people have respiratory ailments and other things that, if they aren't from them, they certainly can't be helped by breathing the dust from agricultural runoff and the other crazy stuff that is in there.
Right. Something you were referencing earlier about like art with purpose, basically, like the reason behind something being created. That's a challenge that I've always had as an artist, is being able to, like, I envy people like yourself who can look at something and start to like connect. Hey, let's just put this thing here. Let's move this thing over here and have this kind of reflection on it and have this kind of thing. And I want to throughout this conversation kind of get a better understanding of how that mental process works, because like for me, I need to feel like, where is this? If I'm taking a photo, for example, I'm like, where is this photo going? Who am I telling a story of? Or for example, a podcast, need to sort of understand what like the end goal is of speaking to an individual. Like, what is the story that we're kind of getting at? And a lot of times the story ends up becoming its own thing that I can't guide or navigate. But the thing that fascinates me from just looking at like your piece over here as we were exploring it, I'm trying to figure out like where you even begin to put that idea together. So I want to go through your process on developing Angler Grove. So this is your piece this year, and last year it was Intergalactic Space Station. Yeah. So and this is the last 2 years that you've been involved with this project.
I didn't know about it for the first one.
Yeah. So tell me about it. Tell me about how this event came into your consciousness. Where did you find out about it, and where the idea for the art piece came together this year's?
It's kind of serendipitous and wild, as a lot of art things, and I guess California things are. I was in Joshua Tree, I think right after Thanksgiving, and I had just started working on this crazy mobile airport control tower, this thing that would normally get dropped out of a big plane and then strung together with a bunch of other cubes of similar size and then stacked with the tower on top, and then generators and HVAC and equipment, communication equipment and structural stuff. And I got the top of one maybe 7 years ago, and I had it just sitting in a friend's yard, and then I moved it to my yard when I was ready to do something, and I just looked at it for like a year because it was so cool and it was so weird. I love to work with...
Can I ask, I'm sorry, where did you get it?
That particular thing I bought on eBay, which it's unusual to find anything that good that's affordable on eBay, but it was so big, especially if something is too big to move, then sometimes nobody wants it, or they'll even pay you to take it away. And
so are you just like surfing eBay for weird shit, or were you thinking specifically?
I was looking for, and I'm very interested, I guess it's maybe like the art version of the tiny house movement. I'm interested in kind of survival pod, like kind of insular environments that can be transformative and somehow inspiring for humans when they go inside them. And I was looking for different things that were portable, that I guess I'm especially interested in turning things into something else in a way that makes a comment on the original part. Like the first big thing I did like that was actually the first large thing I ever brought to Burning Man, the Grotto of Manifest Destiny. And it was this, it's still in my yard in Joshua Tree. So it's very much a niche product, but people loved it. I brought it back 2 other times. It was a 30-foot long military command post on like 5-foot wheels, and both sides opened up like a clam and has to be towed by like a huge vehicle. And I filled it up with flowers made of mostly rubber sex toys, and they're all illuminated by LEDs, and they had like a huge solar array, so it looked kind of almost like a satellite or something, but on wheels, a biodiesel generator, so it could go anywhere. And then it basically did the job of, it was kind of like the fairy godmother of a smaller group of work. I was making these flowers that were all made of sex toys with a ring of solar panels for petals, and then like a clump of car batteries at the bottom that look kind of like bulbs or roots that would charge during the day, and then at night they would softly glow and attract human pollinators, and people would gather around them and be illuminated by the all different colored light from these crazy sex toys, which, you know, even from like 8 feet away, you couldn't really tell what they were. And it just looked like, oh, wow, a sea anemone, or wow, this is an upside down jellyfish. They're all familiar forms in nature. And the sex toy part wasn't really even that important to me, but I loved being able to take this, you know, an instrument of war and make it into this strange contraption that becomes a garden, maybe a tool that partly invokes the idea of love and connection of other humans, and then also bathes everyone in light in a strange way, puts them in a compact environment, and causes them to interact in an intimate and maybe a little bit inspired or stimulated fashion. Like people always say, oh, I had the best time and I met my best friend in there, or oh, we went back at 3 a.m. and whatever, redid our marriage vows. There's like so many funny stories just from Burning Man alone. So that's kind of an obvious one. And then the control tower was also a military thing, and I feel like I made it into this kind of galaxy of and, you know, into a world of that mostly is about, well, about the same kind of things. It's this lovely kind of enveloping, I think mostly female experience to go up the ladder through this, you know, almost feel like you're traveling through an alternate universe, and then you're in this very protective, soft, glittery situation with these vines encircling you, and these interesting flowers kind of glowing on you, and then the other people are packed around this ring of kind of, I call it almost human nesting habitat, and then the ladder is in the middle, and people come and go. It makes for a very it just makes the interaction, the visiting part, even is into almost like a ritual. And I think that's maybe why, one of the reasons why Burning Man is so big and other things like that, because there's not a lot of ritual left that's interesting. It mostly is turned into weird vestigial things where whatever was important or impassioned about it is gone, and it's just the stuff. So it's weird outfits or practices that I don't want to single out any particular one, but
no, it's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, like
exactly.
Andy Warhol's work, until it's become totally meaningless.
Right. So everyone's doing it, but they can't really remember why.
But somehow, like the ritual and that, again, like it's the combination of all these things, the environment, the ritual, the art that people like yourself bring, and brings together that energy. And then from there you get more ideas, you know, like what you're describing about human beings, you know, pollinating around this, you know, this flower. Like, that's fascinating. Was that the original idea that sort of sparked what this piece could be, or did you already have like the pieces and then it came together the opposite way?
Well, these are themes I've been thinking about forever, and I've always made the weird flowery things and the shiny aluminum things, but in the last few years I've been kind of pulling them all together. Not that long ago I made a piece out of an Airstream where I polished the inside and then filled it up with flowers and this kind of topographical sofa situation, not unlike what's in there, and I made an ocular opening on each end, so it's kind of like a walk-in kaleidoscope. And this, or like maybe the interior of a very strange eye that you can go sit in. But if you go out across this, in this case of Bombay Beach, if you walk across Avenue H, it's this huge eye that kind of looks back at you, and the trees kind of turn into eyebrows, and so it does interesting things with scale.
Yeah.
It's probably not an accident that I started camping with Disorient at Burning Man, because I guess it's another thing that I like. If you destabilize anything, then it opens it up a little bit and allows chance, it allows improvisation, it allows inspiration, and also room, I think, more room for the other humans, which is so interesting. And so, for example, I think more so maybe in this grotto that I just finished in Tasmania, that's kind of like the back wall panel of the piece that we're at now. You walk in and you almost can't tell where the walls are, because every wall is made of this incredibly intricate construction of polished aluminum and millions of rivets and tiny curved surfaces, and the light is reflecting in so many directions that you reach out to touch something and maybe it's not there, or maybe you hit it 6 inches before because there's something weird going on. Right. And then I think that kind of opens up a part of the brain where humans are present, mm-hmm. and they're creative and they're curious, and then that's really exciting if you're an artist, because people aren't walking through the museum and being like, oh, naked lady painting, oh, another. The people kind of want to put things in a box and keep moving. The seconds that people spend with an art object is usually very right. slim. So if people actually come into one of my things and hang out for 10 minutes, or sometimes even for longer, for half an hour or an hour, I take that as a great compliment, and it's mostly coming from them, that maybe I opened a door, and maybe it is working as kind of a portal. And that's exciting. And then yeah. they take it from there. Or maybe whoever walks in with them, something else happens, and I just was the catalyst.
Right. I think that the mark of any successful work of art is something that is to some level aesthetically interesting or pleasing, but it also has like a deeper layer that you can go deeper, yeah. depending on where you are spiritually yeah. or psychologically.
That's a great point. Because it's funny, there was a period maybe 20 years ago, I was doing work that I felt like was more pointed, and it was probably easier to look at and say, oh, this is about that, or that's about that. It had more kind of one-line messages, and it wasn't as pretty. And now sometimes I'll be making something and I'll think, oh, that's about to become prettier than it needs to be, just because you like the things that are pretty and shiny. But it's it's kind of like the welcome mat. If something is visually interesting, even if it's menacingly ugly in an interesting way, if people don't want to look at it, then it already failed as a piece of artwork. If it can't get someone to go over and give right. it a minute. So there's a lot of work that I think the thought behind is quite clever, but if it doesn't have a compelling package, then the payload is just sitting there, and it's not that interesting.
Right. It's the art with a purpose thing that we were describing earlier. Like, if people yeah. aren't interested in looking at what you're creating or interacting with it, yeah. your message is not going anywhere anyway.
Right.
So this event, for example, which I want to get back to how you started working on your piece here.
Right.
This will happen a lot. It's okay.
Yeah.
It is very much like the ultimate end mission for this thing, or one of the many end missions for this thing, would be to bring more awareness to this area and help the community, help artists build other communities out here. But the way that we kind of do that is by having this very interesting event and having interesting art in it that people will want to come look at and interact with and touch.
Right.
And then that will get you to look around and say, oh shit, I never even knew this place existed. I didn't
right.
know this was a place that needed some help.
Right.
Yeah. So back to your piece this year. So you'd already done the piece last year after yeah. being introduced to the event. And I imagine after the event ended, you had a bunch of ideas on things you wanted to bring the following year.
Yeah, well, that's when I got. Actually, I have a bunch of pictures. I don't know if it probably doesn't have any place on a podcast, but I did a bunch of elaborate drawings of this.
We can link them.
Kind of oasis that I wanted to put on metal legs out in the water. That it was actually going to use solar energy. I'm a bit of a green designer, and I design spaces and build stuff for architects and designers in New York as my day job. And I made this elaborate thing out of old school moonshine stills. On paper anyway, that was fueled by solar energy that would distill the water and then purify it through different filters. And actually it was using technology that I wanted to use that's kind of very backwards, but would work and be super robust, which when you have something salty and polluted and crusty, you don't really know. You can't use maybe state-of-the-art stuff unless you're out there changing consumable parts all the time. But it originally came out of an idea I submitted to Coachella a super long time ago, where I was going to make a coffee bar out of a bunch of urinals that were stuck in telephone booths, and then the water was going to be distilled, go through a UV lights and 0.01 micron filters, so no rhinoviruses or anything rotten could come along, and then the acid byproduct was going to water sawgrass, so there would be a little lawn, and then there was a high-end coffee bar where the coffee was free on the other end, and they were considering doing it, but then I flunked as a food concession, so I got the plug pulled at the very last minute. So it's great. I'm going to have a piece at Coachella this year that's a more straight ahead sculptural project that will be rising 60, 70 feet from the crowd that is still top secret right now. But anyway, so I want to answer your question about how I got involved, because it's kind of interesting. So I'm looking at the control tower. I figured out what I wanted to do. I actually had drawn it a couple of days before, and I was just thinking, good grief, this is going to cost, this much just to make the steel legs and some other things. I can't just make this for fun. I'm, not a famous artist.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I geek out about this kind of stuff. Where do you sketch out? Do you do you have an office that you're sitting in doing this?
Because of my nomadic life in New York and California, I mean, really, I'm at home at my house every night. I have a teenager. But I spend a lot of time going between different construction jobs, going to my studio. I carry around this ridiculous bag with a big hardwood box full of paintbrushes and pencils and quill pens and crazy stuff. I nearly got kicked out of a nice coffee shop in Palm Springs because I spilled kind of blood red ink on a white table, and I got it off again. But I actually most often I'm drawing in public spaces in between waiting for a meeting or something having to do with my day job, because it's a good way to use downtime. And then I show up at the meeting very centered, and I'm happy and I'm grateful that I have work of all different kinds that I like to do.
Does that waiting time actually inspire some of the ideas? Because I'm thinking about the kids who do some of their best sketches in writing when they're sitting in class and they're supposed to be paying attention.
Oh yeah. Well, my brain is always going on several different channels. And I always have too many ideas. I'm not one of those, I have artist block, artists. Thankfully, I'm more like, I have so much noise in my head, I have to turn it down to 3, then turn the squelch down to, 5, and then very carefully pick a couple things and study them for a while. And I'm great at coming up with terrible ideas. I think one of the nice things about being older is I can tell earlier now that, that's too expensive or that's ridiculous. No one will care about it but you. And I kill them while they're still on paper. So we'll spend some time doing hideous pencil sketches, and then I'll color one in, and then I'll do an ink drawing, and then I'll do kind of a watercolor rendering. And then if that comes out, the ones for this are actually pretty interesting, because I have a before picture and a watercolor drawing that I did that look almost exactly like what was built here, which is unusual. I often, if something goes on for a year, I change it a lot, but I think I bought this house in January and the thing opened in March, so there wasn't much time to change anything. I quickly made everything in New York and put it in a FedEx truck. And then I started fixing the house up 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. It is a quick question before we get back to that.
Yeah.
It is, as you're getting older, I mean, an expert is simply one who's made every given mistake in a very narrow field.
Yeah.
So I imagine as you become more mature as an artist, you have a stronger idea of what you can and can't do and what the end goal is going to be. Is that exciting to you, or do you at some point decide you want to push yourself and go, if you've had too many of those, you go, no, I want to shake it up more. I don't want it to look exactly like what I originally came up with.
Well, I love it when things get better during the process. Even on my construction jobs, one of the things my company Plant in New York is most famous for is I always say that every project deserves to improve during the project, because even the most brilliant architect, designer, decorator, they walk in a few times during the project and they see, oh, wow, this almost lines up with that. Let's move that 6 inches. Or we find some extra space and it becomes the amazing, walk-in wine room, or we find an opportunity. There's just always opportunity in the creative process. I think it has to be kind of a roiling mass that gets nipped and pruned and stirred to be really incredible. I mean, unless you're Picasso, or I should say maybe like Louise Bourgeois or something, the first little squiggle that you do is genius, and someone should take that paper away before you fuck it up. But then maybe you're 70, 80, and you've been doing it for nearly 100 years, and it takes time to be that good.
Sure. Well, back to your sketches on the project here. We were
right. I think because this one was so site specific, and or maybe it was just lucky. Actually, there was a brilliant Palm Springs plastic surgeon was just here, and I showed him one thing and I said, and this was kind of a mistake, but look how good it turned out. And he said that geniuses make the best mistakes, which I wouldn't claim that I'm a genius, but I'm glad one of my mistakes turned out particularly well over here. But I had this kind of aha moment where I was just walking by this house. Sonia and Ernie, who own it, who are kind of major Bombay residents. Some people refer to them as the king and queen, or the mayor and the deputy, and I would be hard pressed to say who is who. And they sold me this place. I saw the crazy trees that fell over and then decided to continue growing, even though they had basically fallen down. And I love that because it's the kind of rebirth or repurposing of a dead thing into a weird horizontal tree. And then the house was obviously a mess. It was filled up to the roof with mostly junk and then some stuff that was special to Ernie. So I wound up helping him clean it out and going through his vast archive from when he was a bachelor. And then there was huge junk in the back, like dead appliances and junked cars and stuff. So just cleaning it up was a tremendous mess. But
so you guys were walking around and you're looking at different potential places to do art, or
I called them. My friend Arwen, who's good friends with them, who's one of the early organizers of this whole thing, said, "Oh, let's go down there for fun, and we'll see if they have anything they're thinking about selling," because it was,
okay.
And then I saw it, and it immediately looked like an eye to me, and I thought, I've done a lot of things where you're looking into something, or kind of like you're looking into a looking glass or gazing ball or a some kind of a ocular device, but this one felt like it could look back. So, and then I felt like, and I actually already had the tree that's out there now, and it was something that I had messed around with and put different places, and I was about to maybe cut it apart into something else, and instead I just gave it a little haircut so it kind of fit in perfectly with those tamarisk trees. But I immediately saw what I wanted to do.
For clarification, the tree you're referencing was your art piece that's like got definitely some of the phallic works on there.
Yes.
But then there's actual trees out there, which almost like when you look at the house could be like that, the head's hair, if you will. Like it's very there's a lot of tree.
It's kind of a hairball made of tamarisk trees that shouldn't really even be alive. But I think there also was a fortuitous plumbing leak that somehow made those trees bigger than anything else here. It's kind of the biggest. It's the grove, it's the greenest area. It's packed with hummingbirds and other things. There's a little hummingbird nest right in the front of it that has 2 eggs in it right now, which I consider a formidable blessing. But when I saw it, it took me maybe like 10 seconds, and I saw the kind of eye thing, and then I saw my tree kind of sprout up next to the other trees, and then I pictured kind of the glow, and I'd never done anything where I put kind of a cushiony situation outside, and I thought, this is the moment where I can weave all of my crazy techno-organic stuff into actual alive stuff, and it all will make sense. And then at the edge of this body of water that alternately is so beautiful and so desolate, and this interesting community that's, partly broken and then also so vibrant and interesting, it's the ultimate place to do this. And if I leave it here and take care of it like a little garden, how cool is that? And now it's a pile of trash. And then I went home and just drew it, and that was that.
Yeah. And then what is sort of the next step in how long before the event was that day where you drew it?
I think it was around Christmas, maybe a little before Christmas.
Okay. And we are in what month we're in? So that's been how many months that you've been developing this?
I was fully committed to it a few weeks later because I had to start making parts immediately in New York, and just like shipping stuff takes a week, and the construction was actually the quickest part.
Yeah.
I don't even have power to that house. It plugs into an extension cord going to my nice neighbor, Kim.
Yeah, we did see that. We had to bring out some janitors for the DJs to set up and everything too. Yeah. So tell me, how would you guide the listeners through the piece, like what they're experiencing as they walk in?
Oh, my advice would be more the opposite of that, to let them be their own guide, because the whole fun of it, I think, is you're coming down this ideally at night or dusk, some crepuscular situation, and you see a little bit of a glow coming out of the hairball of trees and don't know what it is. And then you come around the corner and you look at it, and this weird eye thing is looking at you. And then if you approach it, there's different places where you could contemplate it or sit down, or you can, if you go far enough in, you see the hatch on the side, which is from an old submarine or something. and you can actually go in, and then you're kind of inside this eyeball that also is kind of another galaxy, and the weird scale and perceptual and kind of disorient things happen.
Yeah.
But I love that people make their own way. Some people trundle right over the trees that are lying on the ground, and they step over the foam like they're a tank, and there's other people who kind of nibble at the edge and make their way in, and some people are like, oh wow, it looks like it's underwater, I feel like I'm in the ocean, and some people are like, I'm in outer space. And it's kind of like maybe a Rorschach test on steroids with a little bit of focus added. But I don't like to tell people how to experience stuff so much.
I think Rorschach test is an excellent example of kind of like what I've been trying to chip away at as I'm asking about your process.
Yeah.
Because you do, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm reading that you do have a very comfortable detachment from the experience that one might have from experiencing one of your pieces.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you set up the setting, and then I imagine part of it is the experience that people have, and that's where it all goes.
Well, I'm lucky because now I've been at it for a while, especially the last few years. I've been fortunate to do things on a scale where a lot of people get to see them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a way, Burning Man is where I learned it first in, I think it was 2004, maybe 2006. I brought my first little thing and people freaked out over it. And then I brought the grotto. In New York, the art world is this insular, very inbred, fascinating, inspiring world, but it's very small and people are very serious, and there's all these rules about behavior and social interactions. And, I try to be a good citizen because I love art and that people are also interesting, but there's a lot of black clothes and funny glasses and scowls and frowning and people not talking to one another. And, when I first brought the grotto to Burning Man, I think I wrecked my bus on the way there with the engine caught on fire. I wrecked my ankle so I could hardly walk, and my crew went ahead and they installed my piece beautifully. A bunch of young people in my studio and some Joshua Tree friends. And when I finally biked up, I think it was like 3:30 in the morning, a couple days before it was supposed to, a couple days after I was supposed to be there. And I was just thinking, I'm going to go look at my thing in the dark and maybe it will still be getting assembled. But it was perfectly put together, and maybe 200 people were around it, in it, on top of it, all places they weren't supposed to be. And they were just freaking out for different reasons that I'm sure were Burning Man reasons also.
Uh-huh.
But it was so exciting to see people just not afraid to, be curious, to be inspired, to relax and enjoy something however they want to do. There were people sleeping, there were people making out, there were people climbing, people sitting quietly looking at a star. But it was so inspiring to just see people to get the kind of immediate feedback for people that were really present and interested.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the thing that Burning Man does, is maybe the same thing that I was talking about. If the people get a little bit disoriented and there's some perceptual kind of twist, then it just stops everything and it allows the possibility for other parts of the brain to start turning. So I think it's a very special place to bring a project.
Absolutely. Do you have your earliest memory of not just like, drawing something like the way that kids do, but like your earliest memory where there was an awareness in your consciousness that, oh wait, there's something about doing this that makes me feel different than what society's telling me I'm supposed to be doing?
I think I was very much one of those kids that, people have their thing that they're good at, or maybe it's a gift, or maybe it even can become a plague or a curse of sorts, depending how it's handled. I think, especially for artists, but I think for all humans, that I believe everyone can kind of do everything, but if you're especially good at something, it's important to learn to kind of harness your powers and use them to their highest use. So if you're like I work with people in construction and design who are extremely OCD and meticulous, and if you socialize with them, they could drive you almost insane. But if they're managing a complex project with many micro tasks, then they're like a superhero. So I'm clumsily explaining this, but it's kind of maybe a little bit like the X-Men, that if you learn how to do it in a way that's productive and that's connected to the other humans, then it can be this great gift and it's almost, like rather whatever your spiritual beliefs are, if you're taking your gifts and using them, then that's a very happy recipe to be a human on earth.
Yeah.
Or they can drive you crazy. There's a lot of artists where there's the insanity, the suffering, the old kind of archetypes that I think thankfully are falling by the wayside a little bit.
No, it's definitely the X-Men example is the example I always use too, which is like, it's, if you don't if you don't practice maneuvering the mutant power, it completely turns against you and your family.
Exactly. Or like if people suppress some urge, I always warn people to never say, oh, I would never do that, because, now that I've been around for many decades, I see that almost everything someone says I'll never do, they wind up doing. And especially just my own experience. If I say, oh, I'll never go to Burning Man, I'll never be a vegetarian, I'll never do this, whatever.
Never say never.
Stuff happens.
Yeah. But I'm curious, what was so in your childhood? Did you start by drawing? Were you into comic books, I'm guessing?
Right. Not so much comic books, because they weren't around. But I guess I was trying to get up. It's kind of a mixed bag, because everyone has the different stories, the nature and nurture models. I came from a pretty strange family that I think my household was exceptionally violent and filled with drama. And I think in the beginning, I always loved to draw. And then I think I just did it incessantly as also kind of a self-soothing thing. So it made me happy. It was kind of like maybe meditation would be, if I was better at that, it just put me in a certain spot. So I would just draw for hours and hours. And sometimes I would repetitively draw the same things. Sometimes I would design elaborate things that went on for pages and everything connected to everything. I like to draw weird machines that, even when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I was drawing gears and motors and discussing the merits of the Wankel rotary engine and the V8 engine. And I didn't like sports. I didn't like to go outside so much, which that's changed. I love nature and being out. California certainly put that in anyone.
Yeah.
So I always was doing that, and I actually got a lot of crap for it. And my father would actually walk up to me and say, I think at one point, like half a dozen times, he told me I would actually become a homosexual from drawing all the time, because he was worried that I wasn't playing football. And I even joined the football team for a few months when I was in high school, and one of my friends would tell me who to run after, and he got kicked off the team and I had to quit because I had no one to tell me. So, in a way it was a gift of different sorts then, and I think I just kept refining it. And there were different times when I drifted away from it. I'm a parent. There were years when I was heavy into looking after my daughter when she needed more care. She's just about to turn 20, and my day job, some points I was doing that for 60, 70, 80 hours a week when I was building my company that partly allows me to do the stuff that I can do now.
Right.
But I'm not happy if I'm not doing it. I mean, I have a great life that I wouldn't trade for anything, but if I draw a little bit, I go outside a little bit, I realize, so I am a person. I also have a background of just from my family and my life of ill mental health, depression, different types of wackiness, and addiction. I'm in recovery from addiction also. And I realize now a big part of what makes me feel good is to just be present in the world and to not, because my natural practice, and I think my genetic and maybe the way that I learned it growing up is that, someday when I get over here and I do that and this happens and I take 2 of these and an injection of that, then I'll be okay. And it's such a pleasure to just be where I am now. And part of what kind of knits me into the reality that's so amazing is drawing, being connected with other humans, being creative, and also taking time to, be still and be outside. And I mean, very simple stuff that I think normal people know. Yeah. But I think as a lot of artists have kind of a volatile balance of different things. I think some of my friends have a much harder time. I love Greg. Not to say that he's having a harder time. Did you get to the Hermitage Museum?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I love Greg's work, and I feel like part of his work is a little bit of an illustration of how it's almost like survival skills for like a certain kind of person that somehow his process creates something. I mean, he's the ultimate Bombay Beach artist, because there's such anguish and rawness and this partly disposable, I don't know, desolation in his work, but it's also incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
Everybody, just normal people, look at it, even if they don't know about art, and they're like, that's a cool bird.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's made out of 3 spent cigarettes, a rusty coat hanger, and a footprint, they don't realize how cool it is, but everyone, it's very accessible. So I feel like he's a healer. Mm-hmm. Maybe he's healing himself a little bit, but I actually wish that's in something that I envy. I think that's incredibly powerful in his work.
Absolutely. What did you major in college?
I went to art school.
You went to art school. Okay.
I went to Cooper Union mostly for painting.
Right. So you did soldier past your father's naysaying to some extent.
Yeah. And he probably would love my construction company if he was around, because I have a lot of power tools and people that I boss around. But yeah, it's interesting. And now I think most of my family realize it wasn't a mistake. And I have a friend in New York. He's not around anymore, but he used to always say, "Don't listen to that." One of my good friends is Keith Richards, and as late as the year 2005, his dad would say, "Keith, you really should still learn a trade in case this rock and roll thing doesn't work out."
Oh God, never goes away. No, it's because what you're describing about the challenges with mental health and with addiction and depression and all this stuff. Yeah, there seems to be a consistent narrative that I keep at least running into, and this is strictly anecdotal, that as we suppress our purpose or what our gifts are or what we're drawn towards, our human personality responds to it by trying to communicate in the best way that it can. And so the best way that your body might be able to communicate with you is depression, or by addictive responses to things. And I mean, that's why you have so many artists that are so tortured, because so many of us have dads just like yours,
right.
that are there still. We hear that voice somewhere in the back of the head. And it's interesting to see also those of us that kind of find some sort of a happy medium between accepting sort of, this is where I came from and this is the influence that was there, but then I'm going to follow my own path and build my own future.
Right.
And using that inspiration, it's so you're actually you are actually doing things with your hands. You're actually working in the construction field. It's
right.
There's almost proof, if you needed it, that here you're fine. You
right.
It's acceptable, but you also use that to fuel your art.
Right. Well, I think there's an interesting thing, Freud said that the repetition was an effort to solve the problem. And I think a lot of the things that I've chosen to dig into, with some fervor or things, are very male things. And when I was growing up, I had a lot of trouble with my whole masculine energy. And I basically thought I would turn into this rotten, monstrous, violent person if I fully turned into who I was supposed to be. And now, I love that, I have this huge body of work of kind of interesting, maybe female, maybe ambisexual, kind of beautiful, comforting, nurturing environments that I've made, mostly out of phallic forms, which I don't talk about that much because I haven't made stuff out of sex toys for maybe 10 or 15 years, and people are always like, "Oh, it's the dildo guy." I saw that already, and maybe wasn't the best choice of found objects to use. And the construction business, when I started out in New York, I was this mousy, self-conscious, very shy art student who mostly didn't even talk to men, and somehow I wound up in the construction business. So I'm on these huge projects having to get along with, union sprinkler guys and people that, very, in a way, my worst nightmare. And somehow I was forced to, like a samurai sword, to turn into somebody that could spring back and cut through whatever. And now I get in very high testosterone kind of charged situations and job sites where the plumber wants to beat the electrician with a pipe and the welder wants to set them both on fire. And I can easily walk over and put my arm around all three and say, I think what little Kenny is saying is that his feelings are hurt that you didn't give back a screwdriver. Can you bring it tomorrow? Or maybe you buy the coffee today, or I can make a joke out of it and move freely through stuff that used to seem really intimidating to me. And if you asked me, what are you going to do when you grow up? I would never say that,
Right.
But, and it's been great. And it's partly, I don't know. Maybe that doesn't have to do with anything. I think another.
It has a lot to do. This is deeply resonating with me personally. I can tell you. I also had experience in the violent household, my upbringing, and a lot of what you're describing about exploring masculinity, or whatever the hell the definition of masculinity is supposed to be, is a lot of the experiences that I also had. To some extent, because I come from a Middle Eastern background. So like here's a really silly example, just as a frame of reference. The way I cross my legs. I remember the American kids constantly would make fun of me because I cross it knee over knee, because in Middle Eastern culture, showing the sole of your shoe to the person sitting next to you is an insult. So it's not something you ever think about. It's just the culture there. Yeah. So, but like, I remember like my very American dude friends, my frat brother types, they were like, man, I can't sit like that. My balls won't fit. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they can, because the other half of the world is doing it. And it's fascinating to explore that, because, and I'm kind of hearing some of, I feel like on a lot of your art, you're kind of exploring some of this as well, which is, it's artists, a lot of artists tend to be, maybe it's part of the exploration that goes into it, because you're going deeper and deeper into the thoughts, you're linking to the next thing. There is a dance moving between masculinity and femininity as energies. Yes. And so much of society has always written the narrative as, if you are male, then you are masculine, and if you are female, you are feminine, and you must fit into these two boxes. Right. And the more we're exploring the art, these communities, Burning Man, that was huge for me personally. The Burning Man culture as a whole, allowing people to continue to explore those things. Like, it's okay. You can wield the feminine energy and dance in those waters without feeling like your quote unquote manhood is being ripped out of you. And the more you dive into that, the more interesting your work gets, the better your community gets, the easier you can communicate with people and talk to people. And, the more beautiful your family structure gets.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting. What a great way of putting it.
Yeah. It's it kind of like, I wanted to ask, like, I'm guessing, like, I'm feeling like perhaps some of this might have been connected to some of your experiences exploring Burning Man, but let's see where it goes. I want to know when your first burn was. How did you get into these crazy circles?
I think I first went in 2006, and it's partly because when I made my first bunch of flowers out of sex toys, it was like a 3-foot field of sex toys up to maybe 2 feet long, kind of dangling out like a big sea anemone with the solar panels around them, and people would come up and say, "This is so cool here in Joshua Tree." Like, I got one of my things covered up by a born again tent revival church, and the police came. It was awesome. So it was partly received well and partly controversial, but everyone was like, "You should just bring this to Burning Man, because everyone will love it, and even people that don't love it will be interested in it. There will be a dialogue." So I bolted one of them on the back of this old red diesel bus that I turned into kind of a camper with a wood stove and kind of this hillbilly living environment. And I went to Burning Man for the first time.
Were you aware of Burning Man prior to that, or did it come
I knew what it was, but kind of like a lot of people, I just heard people talking, and I put together kind of a patchwork of different misperceptions, and I thought everyone would be running around naked and acid and going to the bathroom on the ground and carrying on willy-nilly. But the thing that actually got me to go, the other thing that got me to go is I was trying to solve some electrical problems. I used to make very complicated electronic work that was kinetic, like flowers that opened and did strange things when you approached them. The last thing, actually before Burning Man, I was making the series of flowers made of rubber chickens sewn together, and then these giant arrays of feather dusters that would open when you came near them, and then these weird kind of oscillating things on the inside that I'm not going to describe because I don't want your viewers to have nightmares, but they had beautiful moments, but they were kind of disturbing. But I was reading this computer bulletin board that for the longest time I just thought, who are these people? Because they know about everything. They're brilliant on like 20 different topics: solar energy, low voltage, electronics, some complicated digital circuit design. And I just started reading their didn't even realize what I was reading. I think there weren't even really pictures. It was just a text bulletin board, like an old Usenet group or something. And then I realized it was the AEZ group, which is one of the older big groups. It's all alternative energy, no generators, so it's quiet, and people build all these Rube Goldberg devices to evaporate their gray water and generate energy in ways that are sometimes interesting or educational, or just so wacky that you have to stop and scratch your head. And that made me want to come. I realized, oh wow, all of these people are going to be there. And then I'm camping in my crazy bus with my crazy flower thing on the back with people that are defense contractors, university professors, CEOs of, aerospace corporations and scientists. And then now I'm with Disorient, which is maybe a more recreational, wild, loud music kind of camp, which is, the music isn't even in my top 5 interests, but it was so inspiring to be with them. And then I started venturing out a little bit, and people would come see me and say, well, who's Polumbo? Who made the grotto? And then I was really into it, and I think I came for 5 or 6 years, and then I took 8 years off, just because I think mostly being a parent, being busy, I wasn't out in Joshua Tree as much. My partner was somebody that didn't like the desert, and then I came back just kind of on a whim. Some of my ranger friends in Joshua Tree were like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, nothing. I had some big plans that didn't work out. And they said, well, come build our tent and make salads for us, and you can bike around. We have some early passes. So I just threw all my tools in a couple of bags, mounted them on my bike, and I helped them. And then I just biked around and helped people build stuff that were having problems. So I'm technically proficient at a lot of different things, and that was so fun, not having a project and just being the extra guy that has the soldering iron and the blowtorch and all crazy shit you can't believe is on a bike.
You were the guy with the chalk this time.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think that's part of the art thing too that people don't talk about, but especially as you get older, that there's the community aspect, there's the world citizen aspect, and there's a service aspect, even if you just are making things that are pretty, which is not the only thing that I'm interested in doing. If there's a generosity to it, that's more sustaining than maybe getting to do exactly what you want, or getting like the kind of dreams that I have now aren't like, oh, when I have that, then I'll be okay, or when I'm over here. It's more like, I want to affect this in the world, or I want to make this mark that will have this, cascading effect of, even a simple thing here, this, like the ripple and kind of the energy of the universe is created by the Bombay Beach Biennale. Even if half of it has nothing to do with ecology or social, reform or more obvious activism kind of stuff, it does bring this incredible amount of energy to this point. And something is going to happen here that I think mostly is going to be good. I don't think it's going to be independent cafes and investment bankers buying it up and turning it into a suburb. I think the version of whatever it will be here is going to be more intentional, and I don't know, maybe it's too hard to chart, but I'm not knocking investment bankers either, because everyone has a place, but there's something, the whole disaster part of it needs help. So I think just putting that amount of energy to it, that something cool will happen.
There's without doing, I'm not at all passing any judgment on the investment bankers either, but a common observation that I've had, which I think like Burning Man is also an interesting microcosm of exactly that, is that environments like this, this is sort of like maybe the one of the more extreme ends of the spectrum in some of the environments like this that I've experienced. But environments that are not immediately popular, a lot of times these communities will begin with a little more the people who were there from the beginning, that they're more a part of the environment, they feel more comfortable being part of it, they don't need it to change and be more comfortable, if you will.
Right.
And then little by little, you'll have more community builders that move in. And that tends to be, coincidentally, funny enough, a lot of people from the LGBTQ community, and a lot of artists. And then that develops and it becomes the cool thing. And eventually, when it's now super cool and it's this thing that people want to be a part of, the investment banksters and the hipsters and stuff will show up, and they'll buy up the condos, and then you get into the gentrification conversation.
Right. I guess I forget.
Burning Man, by the way, is a mini microcosm of that. beginning of the week is like DPW, builders. Yeah. By the final weekend, it's, the partiers.
Right. Well, I forget who said that the pithy statement that artists are the shock troops of gentrification, because it's kind of true, but
yeah,
I'm not sure if I see that path here, because I don't know that there's the capitalist upside, right? Maybe
not yet.
People could speculate in real estate, but how much could they possibly make? They bought the lot across the street for $2,000 at the tax auction, and
no one comes into it with that intention. And you're right. I think I agree with you that I can't see that happening quite here yet, but it could be after mine and yours lifetime.
True.
Someday, imagine a few decades from now looking back and saying, wow, look at that.
Right.
That was the original thing that started to take off at Bombay Beach. And then, who knows, 50 years later, 100 years later, it's back to the original thing it was designed to be, the hotspot.
Right. And then maybe if this winds up being somehow frozen in a way that's worthwhile to the people that have always lived here, with maybe some room for some cultural and creative kind of questioning, or just maybe fertilizing and catalyzing. I think that's interesting. And then everywhere else can be water skiing and pleasure crafting.
Well, go ahead.
I mean, Joshua Tree is maybe a more potent example of something like that, because it's just exploding with the number of people that want to come. So now there's crazy waits to get in the park, and half of the real estate is turned into vacation rentals, and it's, in some ways, everyone has money and is getting their teeth fixed and has a car now. All the people that, it's another very sleepy place where it's hard to make a buck if you don't have some way to work online or just bring money there from somewhere else.
Right.
But it does seem like, with careful guidance and a lot of thoughtful citizens kind of watching out for it, that I don't think it will get ruined. I think it will eventually, things will settle down and it will be good and it will be stable. Maybe like a place like Marfa or something, where people realize, okay, what makes this cool is, Donald Judd and different minimalist art installations, and kind of an environment that allows for more of that to keep happening. So that first that gets watered, and then some tourism, and then some other stuff, and then obviously everybody who's got a ranch and the hardware store and the gas station have to be okay too. That there's room for everyone if things are prioritized in a thoughtful, smart way, and not just allowed to turn into chain stores and big boxes or whatever.
Absolutely.
I don't think we're getting a Walmart at Bombay Beach.
Right.
But I'll be here marching against it if they come.
I think we can't not do what we think is the best thing to do, what is the most sincere thing to do, because we're afraid of what might happen 60 years from now.
Right.
I can't figure out the logic going that direction. Like that, the statement about the artists being the shock troops of gentrification.
Right.
Which is interesting, because it's like, I've spent plenty of time in neighborhoods that have strong artist presence that, like Barrio Logan, for example, in San Diego, is a predominantly, Mexican community. And there was quite a bit of art presence there long before, the gentrification. If anything, the movement over there was sort of like trying to fight against, quote unquote, gentrification. So that right there is a whole different rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
At what year did you start camping with Disorient?
I think I'm coming up on my fourth year.
Yeah.
Maybe my fourth year.
How did you end up there?
Well, I know Leo Villarreal from New York, and we met a long time ago, both doing art stuff. And I also know Dr. Deb and Brian from Palm Springs. They come up to Joshua Tree, and they're often seen in New York periodically. I think especially because they're very close with Leo and Yvonne. And all four of them always said, "Oh, come camp with us." And I had pretty much quit going, and I wasn't sure if I was coming back. So then when I came back and I was with my ranger friends, I kept finding myself over at Disorient, and I was thinking, it's kind of a party atmosphere. Everybody seemed really young, and it was huge, and this music that is not entirely my thing, although I have stuff that I really like, and I love the actually love that it's a music camp. There's always something cool going on, and people come from all over to see it. But I thought, oh, well, I'm here anyway, so and people I really like, especially, are here, so I'll try it. And then it seems like, I don't know, it just feels like home to me. There's some very special core group of people that kind of keep everything good. That I love that as a builder kind of person, that the eye comes up with some, wild plan that actually is very orderly, but if you just watch some corner of it, you wouldn't even know. And then if you look at it from outer space, it even looks elegant and beautiful. So that turns me on. And then it's chaotic like everything Burning Man, but the fact that it's a little bit organized and everyone pitches in a somewhat chartable fashion is cool. It's like for a biggish camp, it's a real do-it-yourself camp. People are making the food. I trenched the utilities often. I started bringing equipment from Joshua Tree because it's not that far.
Yeah.
And it's a camp where if you're like, oh, I need a weird piece of steel, or I need, like, if someone comes to us, we could actually make them stuff. Where it's a real maker camp. There's a whole container full of hackers and digital electronics and crazy LED stuff with Leo and the people from Hack Rock City.
Yeah.
And then there's structural work going on to some degree. So I feel like it has excellent bandwidth.
Yeah.
And there's always new stuff happening there too. It's not just like putting up the same thing. It's different every year.
Yeah. It's definitely, I mean, it's a camp that has a very good reputation. It's interesting because, like, you'll get like sort of some of the more veteran burners that like to rant about the good old days, and they'll talk about like this sound camp and that sound camp, and like, yeah, this orient generally has a good reputation, and I would imagine that's due to what you're describing, is that there is this active involvement in the building process and that sense of community.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. It's funny, that seems like the only very predictable thing about Burning Man. I think the first time I went, I heard from everyone that, oh, it's not the same anymore. Yeah. Don't even go. And then when I went, last year, people are still saying, oh, it's too big now. But I heard when I first was there, it was too big. And I think now it's 3 or 4 times as big. And it still kind of seems the same to me. I think the great thing about doing an art project is it's super fun to come early.
Yeah.
It's even if you're volunteering on somebody else's projects, which I learned going around like a bee. And then you get to bike around and watch all these wild things arising from the sand, like, maybe the pyramids, and it looks like the people are ants from far away, and just over a few days, the last little bits of it come together. And maybe this is controversial, but I love to leave early. I put a lot of work into building my camp and doing stuff on the front end that I think I'm particularly well suited to do, and Disorient has an awesome kind of breakdown, disengage force and a good record of that. And, especially coming back to Joshua Tree, it's a pleasure to drive out like a Thursday in 20 minutes and go down 395 and stop at the Pacific Crest Trail and stop at Yosemite and stop at 3 different hot springs and then be in Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And then be ready to receive some guests when they come down the hill, 4 days later, and they're totally smoked. And maybe have a little, what do they call it? Afterburn or sometimes I just go rush back to New York and see my kid. I've been gone for a couple of weeks by then. I haven't seen the man burn. I think I only saw that the first 2 times, and it was glorious. And I always watch it on video somewhere or another, so I kind of saw it. But not that many burners say this, but I don't like crowds that much.
Yeah. You know what? More people say that to me than you would imagine. Yeah, it's interesting. There is definitely more and more. It's becoming more common in the experiences that I've had and people that I've spoken with, that people like yourself who like to be there for the build week, and you're there sort of like coming up until, but then that final weekend, you're like, all right, I don't need that particular climax,
Right. I think maybe that's why my work is salient for right now, because I brought Angel Queen last year, the tower, and it created intimacy and privacy. And it didn't turn into somewhere where people were lining up to fornicate, which I was a little bit curious if it would. Mostly strangers talk to each other, somewhere quiet, out of the wind, a little bit out of the sun. And that's so magical, because I do remember when I first started coming, it was much more likely that you'd be standing around and somebody would say some random thing, and then you'd give some random answer, and then you might make some new friend from somewhere around the world that you would never find, who has, 2 PhDs or maybe some special talent that you would never even know existed, or just way out of your wheelhouse. And that's incredible. If it gets super, super big, then I think it's harder for that to happen. And then maybe it's part of the job of the artists and the planners to make these little nooks and crannies where the cross-pollination happens, that I think is a big part. The ritual, the cross-pollination, and the opportunity to kind of be present with other humans in a way that the world often doesn't allow. I think those are maybe the things that turn me on the most.
Yeah. Has Burning Man affected the way that you create art and your own process in a way that you could articulate?
I think it certainly has. I think it made it easier for me to see that I could kind of dream big, and that people would help me in ways that didn't necessarily have to be about how much money can I find and how many people can I pay. So I have a little bit of a community. Like the grotto, even before it left, people were turning up in Joshua Tree and helping me. Even people that weren't burners, people are just like, what the hell is going on? Why do you have this huge meal in the middle of this parking lot every day? And what is this crazy thing? There's the community aspect, and the generosity of it kind of opened my eyes. And then I think it also made me want to put that back out in the world in my work. So I'm not afraid to be more, to reach out further and to maybe dig into what I think of as maybe people's psyches or sensory experiences in a more active way, because I feel like it touched me, and it makes me want to touch everyone back.
Yeah. Has Burning Man or any other experiences further developed your own relationship with masculinity or previous definitions?
I think it definitely, there's something healing about just how out in the world that everyone feels comfortable being. There's so many men running around in dresses, and people clearly experiencing all different versions, flavors, and channels of gender and other identity factors. I think there's something incredibly potent and healing about that too. Actually, I love that so many people doing heavy work. Made it disorient. There's some dude that always has just a tool belt and no clothes who's climbing around on the scaffold. And then, does everyone in the DPW wear those kilt things? Or do they just happen to, a lot of them have them?
I think it's pretty common. The utility kilt.
Yeah.
The one I know consistency I've seen is a lot of cars with missing doors. That's the most common trait I've seen.
Nice. So I think the do-it-yourself thing permeates everything. And I think that the do-it-yourself and the gender part it's interesting. It's like my daughter's about to turn 20, and her generation, they don't really think about it that much. Yeah. I remember 5 years ago, everyone was a lesbian, or they were bi, or they were whatever. Now they're in college. They have their pronouns at the end of their email. Yeah. And they don't really have labels. They think it's quaint. Yeah. And so, sometimes they'll make fun of me. I'll make some food and then do my parental job of leaving the premises after I've provided for them and set the atmosphere. And they'll make some comment like, Father, it's kind of like the beginning of Road Warrior when they're talking about the car, that this is the last interceptor. And they'll say, you're the last white heterosexual male. There will never be, you're like a V8 engine.
Yeah. You're so binary. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
What are you working on next that you're really excited about?
Well, there's my secret project that will first be seen at Coachella, and then I'm actually hoping to drag to Burning Man, but it's so big. I think I'm going to do my first crowdfunding thing ever.
Really?
Because just moving it down the hill is going to be a big project, and then I'm going to change it somewhat and hopefully lug it, but I've really outdone myself both budget-wise and time-wise, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get it to Burning Man on my own, so it's going to go. And
your first crowdfunding?
6 flatbeds of it'll look like a little military deployment. Like in Joshua Tree, there's always like half of a missile with the other half of the missile going by and 3 tanks coming up the road behind it. it's going to be like that, except for the threatening death dealing part. And I'm working on another grotto at a secret location in Connecticut that's on the top of a grain silo. And I have another silo-ish project that I have up my sleeve in Joshua Tree, but I'm probably not going to get to it. And then that one's going to be mobile. It's 40 feet tall with kind of another travel towards the heavens and then being kind of encapsulated with a very focused viewing the outside world experience. So I have a long to-do list.
Yeah. Got to get on those emails.
Right.
Sounds good. Randy, thank you so much for everything you do for the community. Thank you so much for sitting down with us. And it's a pretty amazing experience. I'm looking forward to any of our listeners who, I'm sure many people are hearing some of the stuff we're talking about going, oh yeah, I remember that piece. Or they're going to be going down the rabbit hole, exploring all the stuff you've been working on.
I love that how far Burning Man penetrates into the collective consciousness. I had a group of people at my house in Joshua Tree visiting. It was rented and there was some issue and we were talking, and I called them up because I knew they were upset and we wanted to do something nice for them. And we were talking, and then she said, "Wait, are you the Randy that did Angel Queen?" And then they're like, "Oh, we loved your thing. We did acid in it for 3 days, and then we came back and meditated for half a day. We love you." And then, like, I thought I was going to get yelled at and then send some bottles of wine, and instead I have some new friends, which is so awesome.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is absolutely amazing. It's still constantly blows my mind how much I have to ask that question less often when I meet somebody. Are you familiar with Burning Man? Like they already are.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Randy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming and doing all that you do. Yeah. I'm excited to see what you come up with.
I'm looking forward to hugging you in the nest.
Great.
By the way, a very, very special thanks to Sarah Husby, environmental policy consultant, who's also my partner, for explaining the Salton Sea in a way that I could sort of put together and put that into the beginning of the show. You are now listening to the sounds of Orion Kaiser. This was Orion's set at Disorient annual country club bash in upstate New York. We'll play about an hour of it. If you want to hear the rest, please do visit Disorient's SoundCloud. That's soundcloud.com/disorientmusic. All of Orion Kaiser's links are over at his own website. That's Orion Kaiser, spelled OrionKeyser.com. Please do give us a like on Facebook and join the Facebook group, and leave us a review on iTunes. It does help to get the show more visibility, so more of our tribe can be a part of this conversation. All these links are over at burnerpodcast.com. You can connect with me on all these social medias at Mr. Arash. That's MRARASH. Burner Podcast is produced by Rebel Dharma, along with associate producer Tori Massey, and is released on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. Available on all the podcast platforms. Podcast platforms. All of them. Our opening theme music is America's Horse with No Name remix, produced by Joman. His stuff is over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joman. We just love the ever-loving shit out of you, dear listeners. So until next time, love and light and all that other crap. Take it away, Orion Kaiser.
don't talk to me, they look right through. They don't talk to me, they look right through. They don't talk to me, they look right through. They don't talk to me, they look right through.
were holding hands and I'll never be the same.
transcend language barriers. Music transcends racial barriers, international barriers. Music goes everywhere. Music is a healing force, so it's good for everyone to keep the music alive, keep the culture alive. I always try to do my music to contribute to keep the music alive, keep the culture alive. Music can transcend language barriers. Music transcends racial barriers, international barriers. Music goes everywhere. Music is a healing force. So, you know, this music and soul music is good for everyone. I want to say, you know, thank you. Yeah, you getting down. music can transcend language barriers. Music transcends racial barriers, international barriers. Music goes everywhere. Music is a healing force, so it's good for everyone to keep the music alive, keep the culture alive. Music can transcend language barriers. Music transcends racial barriers, international barriers. Music goes everywhere. Music is a force. So, this music and soul music is good for everyone. I want to say, thank you. Yeah, you getting down.
burnerpodcast.com.